Final countdown to the 2022 midterm elections. Voters will not only decide who they want to represent their community, but also answer 11 questions on the ballot. And we're going deeper behind the headlines on a possible fix to the housing crisis.
In Colorado, we are certainly at a peak point of need.
To making school meals free for all students permanently.
We want to make sure that kids who need lunch have it.
We also look at a proposition to save you money by lowering taxes.
What we need to do is put more money back into the pockets of people.
And the future of how and where you can buy your alcohol and even some psychedelic substances. We share the different perspectives and contexts to help you make an informed decision for November 8th.
At the end of the day, all this is giving more information to voters. What they do with that information is up to them.
From affordable meals for students to alcohol delivery, even decriminalizing magic mushrooms. The election will have major implications for all Coloradans. Political reporter Megan Lopez begins our 360 in-depth coverage. Now, first up, Proposition 123, which would dedicate Tabor money to affordable housing projects.
There is an intersection in Denver where no matter which corner you stand on, a crane is at work. All around Colorado, from mountain communities like Winter Park to suburban areas like Parker, construction is underway. Despite all of this,
we are not building enough housing to keep up with both our population growth or our job growth.
Now a November ballot initiative wants to dedicate taxpayer money to focus on affordable housing. In this Denver 7 Election 360, we'll hear from supporters of the idea, critics, and someone living in affordable housing. But first, here's a policy expert to explain how we got into this housing crisis in the first place.
We are experiencing real affordability crunch. Housing prices have significantly outpaced growth in income and wages.
While the pandemic highlighted Colorado's housing challenges, Molly Fitzpatrick from Root Policy Research will be the first to tell you this problem is more than a decade in the making.
In the economic recession, 2007 to 2010, we really stopped building. We built almost nothing kind of in those years.
Between 1995 and 2005, Colorado added about 40,000 units a year. Now we're building about 27,000 per year, but the state's population is growing much more rapidly. Construction has picked up, but
what we are building is at the higher end of the market. So we're also not meeting the needs of folks that are either trying to get entry-level kind of ownership housing, that kind of first-time buyer option, nor are we getting residential rental construction that really meets the needs of the incomes that people have.
It's a unique opportunity for Colorado to be a national leader.
Why proponents of Proposition 123 say now is the time to invest in affordable housing.
We believe that safe, stable, and healthy communities are built upon the foundation of housing.
Here's how it would work. The state would take 0.1% of your income taxes and dedicate it to affordable housing projects. That means you would see fewer Tabor refunds each year. So remember that check you got in the mail this year?
It would be $43 less out of the $750 Tabor refund that they received.
And $86 per taxpayer in 2024. The measure would bring in about $270 million next year alone. Money that would be used to provide grants for affordable housing construction, down payment programs, rental assistance, housing vouchers for the homeless, and more.
We're trying to come up with a solution that will build 10,000 homes a year, that over the course of 20 years could really get a huge dent into our housing deficit.
I think we all want a place to call home.
The Colorado Realtors Association has seen firsthand how hard it is to buy a home and who it impacts the most.
We know there is a huge disparity in racial gap in homeownership.
Elizabeth Peets is particularly excited about the assistance this would provide directly to families.
As you're renting, you are able to save and get some of the equity of renting to prepare you to get that down payment to get home ownership.
In a neighborhood near Elyria, Swansea.
This is like the first time I have felt so settled, where it makes it easier to paint and, I don't know, like feel more security.
Kiana Madison and Zach White's story is like a lot of Coloradans.
There's times where we're deciding between, do we cut back on food? Do we cut back on healthcare costs in order just to afford rent?
She's an artist. He runs a screen printing shop, and no matter how hard they work to save for a down payment,
the home valuation has been increasing faster than it's possible to save towards.
But finally, thanks to a Habitat for Humanity program, they have a home to call their own. Not everyone qualifies for that type of program, though, and nonprofits can only help so many. So they support the ballot measure and hope it will help others afford a house just like them.
We're definitely going to lose a lot of amazing families, individuals, community members if we don't handle the affordable housing crisis.
Families are going to be facing higher taxes, they're facing higher food budgets, their gas prices are going up.
While the Affordable Housing Initiative isn't a direct tax hike, critics say it might as well be.
And they want to just swipe any or all of a Tabor rebate that the family might count on next year.
Ken Pfeiffer is a former state lawmaker and the chairman of the Tabor Committee. It's not that he doesn't empathize with the need for affordable housing, but
the proponents have acted as if this is the first dollar that goes to affordable housing. They have just completely ignored the fact that there are lots of programs,
as well as hundreds of millions in investments from state and federal governments. So he doesn't understand
why that isn't fixing the problem.
So he wants to see that money better prioritized rather than relying on taxpayers for more funding. And he says state and local governments can help by cutting red tape.
We know that if you remove a great deal of that unnecessary regulation, that you'll be able to get housing faster, less expensive.
The affordable housing crunch is complex. It wasn't created in a day, and it won't be solved overnight. In November, voters will have a chance to decide how much of a priority it should be for the state and whether they're willing to put their money where their vote is.
The COVID-19 pandemic showed us just how vulnerable families are to food insecurity. The city of Denver estimates that food insecurity surged from 11% to 33% during that time. The federal government provided some help by offering free school meals for students through a waiver program, but that program has ended. So now a November ballot measure would provide free school meals for all Colorado students permanently. Megan is breaking down the arguments for and against Proposition FF.
In school cafeterias across Colorado, there's a controlled type of chaos.
Okay, you're good to go.
As one by one, little bellies come to fill up before little minds go to work in the classroom. During the pandemic, food insecurity was high for families, so the federal government offered programs to pay for free meals for students. But over the summer, that program ended. Now a ballot question is asking voters whether they want to make free school meals permanent. Proposition FF asks voters if they want the state to create a program to pay for free meals for all public school students starting next year. The program would be funded in two ways: increased federal funding through reimbursements and limiting the amount of charitable deductions those making $300,000 or more could write off on their taxes. Those write-offs would be capped at $12,000 for individuals and $16,000 for joint filers. The change is expected to bring in $100 million each year to pay for the meals. In this Denver 7 election 360, you'll hear from a student who relied on these meals, a cafeteria worker who says this will help employees, and a former teacher who thinks this is a bad idea. First, some context. A report by the Education Data Initiative found that 336,000 kids qualify for free and reduced meals in Colorado. Another 35,000 kids in the state are food insecure, but their families make too much to qualify for federal help. Their average lunch debt is $170 per child. As a whole, Colorado has $6 million in school lunch debt.
When I was in middle school, my father unfortunately lost his job.
Daniel Sharinsky knows what it's like to need a free meal.
Sometimes those meals didn't exactly fill me up and weren't exactly nutritious. And sometimes I occasionally just wouldn't get lunch because of that embarrassment.
Not eating made it harder for him to concentrate in class. He says this proposition will take away the shame for students.
A lot of working class families right now have a lot of other expenses that they need to take care of.
On the other side of that buffet line,
I see a lot of kids come to school and rely on our food to eat.
Xander Kashup, the kitchen manager at Swanson Elementary. He's seen student after student come in who can't afford the food.
It's heartbreaking. If I ever have to turn a kid away because they can't afford to eat, I take that home with me. It's terrible.
Along with free meals, starting in 2024, the program would also provide grants for districts to buy fresh food from local farmers and update kitchen equipment to cook it.
Right now, our menus are they're full of highly processed, pre-cooked food, canned vegetables and fruits. We can do better for our kids.
It would also pay kitchen staff more as many districts face shortages, so he supports it.
At 4th and 6th grade, we had a majority of our kids were lower income.
So former teacher Michael Fields knows how important food security is for students.
We want to make sure that kids who need lunch have it.
But he doesn't support this ballot question. Fields says there are already state and federal programs to help the students in need that will stay in place regardless of whether Proposition FF passes. But his big question:
should we be paying for lunches for families that can afford it?
He thinks it's unfair to have 5% of taxpayers fund the meals for everyone's kids, and he worries about the effects this will have on charities.
I think a lot of people do give based on the tax incentives, or we wouldn't have those out there to start with. Is it more important for my kid to have a free lunch, or is it more important for money to go to maybe a organization that's helping homeless people or people on drugs or other kinds of charities?
He supports moving to healthier meals. He just doesn't think this is the way to do it. In school cafeterias across Colorado, lunchtime is the best time, a chance to make friends and make memories. But for some students, it's a source of stress. Proposition FF would make it so that students don't have to worry about being able to afford meals. But voters will decide whether this idea is the right one for the state.
Coming up, reducing taxes to offset inflation. How the proposal to make your hard-earned dollars go further could cost Colorado more money in the long run. Inflation's been tough for a lot of families. And one ballot initiative promises to offer some savings for workers, but opponents say it comes at too high a cost. Megan Lopez breaks down Proposition 121 in our next Ballot 360.
There is a saying, in this world, nothing is certain except for two things: death and taxes. Coined by Benjamin Franklin, but still true today. For decades, Colorado's income tax depended on how much you earn, until 1987 when it became a flat 5% tax for everyone. That dropped to 4.75% in 1999, then 4.63% in 2000, and these days it's at 4.55%. Proposition 121 asks voters if they want to lower the state income tax to 4.4%. It would apply to both individuals and corporations. In this Denver 7 Election 360, you'll hear from supporters of the tax cut who say this is about saving people money, opponents who say this will affect a lot of state programs, and a tax expert about where Colorado currently stands. Between inflation and the supply chain,
costs are going up so much, like groceries, gas, everything else is costing people a lot of money.
But while families struggle, Michael Fields from Advanced Colorado Action says the state is doing fine.
The state has more money than ever. We're at a $38 billion state budget. We have enough to take care of government. What we need to do is put more money back into the pockets of people.
It's true that the state's budget is bigger than ever. A strong economy, robust tax revenue, and a massive influx of federal funding has resulted in a $36.4 billion budget this year. With that, state lawmakers increased school spending, put money in the rainy day fund, and allocated more for construction and air quality projects, among other priorities. The ballot measure means the state would collect $412.6 million less next year alone, a 2.4% drop in the general fund revenue. Most people would see about $63 in savings per year. Still, for families just trying to pay for the everyday,
$60 is a lot, when groceries are up, when inflation is 8.2%.
And Fields says this could make Colorado more attractive for businesses, which would, in turn, bring in more tax revenue.
We can afford it, and it helps our state be more competitive.
Colorado has one of the lowest income taxes in the country.
Scott Wasserman from the Bell Policy Center points out voters just decided to cut taxes 2 years ago. Whenever that happens, some people save more.
People who are very wealthy stand to gain thousands of dollars from this income tax cut, whereas the average Coloradan will get maybe $65.
People earning $1 million or more make up less than 1% of taxpayers in the state, but they would see nearly half of the total savings from this ballot measure.
We're asking Colorado voters to just really stop and ask themselves, do you stand to lose more than you would gain?
Wasserman says the state might have more cash than ever now, but those federal dollars aren't going to keep flowing forever. And even though the economy is doing well, there's no guarantee for the future.
We may find ourselves perhaps in a recession in 1 or 2 years. They have to ask themselves, what am I going to lose in roads? What am I going to lose in schools? What am I going to lose in mental health?
Or some could choose to raise fees or sales taxes to try to make up the difference, which disproportionately impacts lower income families. So he wants people to vote no, To put Colorado's tax code into context,
Colorado has one of the simplest income tax rates in the whole country.
the state also ranks 19th in the nation for the lowest tax burden. MSU professor Robert Persichiti says lowering the income tax would mean fewer tax returns for families.
We're not having this system where you give us money and then we give you money back.
Even if voters reject this measure, though, income taxes will still go down for the next 2 years to 4.5% thanks to Tabor and the fact that the state collected over the revenue cap in previous years. But in the future, if this passes,
The short term, what we would really see is an end to those Tabor rebates.
Colorado's income taxes are simple because they're the same for everyone. People on both sides have called for them to go away forever.
If we can move away from taxing income,
I would also love to take Colorado to a zero income tax state.
Others want to rework Colorado's tax code to make it more progressive so that the rich pay more. For now, it's up to voters to decide if it's time to reduce the income tax in the state once again.
Next, expanding liquor store locations in Colorado. Millions pouring in from out of state to promote Prop 124, and that has smaller shops feeling like they're losing this battle. There are 3 questions on the November ballot that deal with liquor. Now, 2 are getting a lot of attention, dealing with alcohol delivery and selling wine in grocery stores, and we'll get to those in just a bit. But the 3rd is getting a lot of outside money. Megan takes a closer look at Prop 124 in this ballot breakdown.
Of the 3 ballot initiatives dealing with alcohol, Proposition 124 is probably the easiest to overlook. Liquor license laws just aren't as attention-grabbing as alcohol delivery or wine in grocery stores. But this ballot question could have a big effect on the industry. Here's what it does. It asks voters if they want to allow liquor stores to be able to apply to open additional locations in a phased-in approach. First, they'd be able to have 8 licenses, then 13 in 2027, then 20 in 2032, and 5 years later, unlimited licenses. This measure has the business community split. David Ross
I am an owner, operator of Big Fella Wine and Liquor out in Bennett, Colorado.
is on the pro side. He opened his first store about 4 years ago and says it's been so successful he's ready for more.
I'd love to have a Big Fella 2 or a Little Fella. I haven't thought about how I'd name them yet.
Currently, Colorado law says these retail stores can only have up to 3 locations, though there are some exceptions for liquor licensed drugstores like Costco. But David is stuck at one store because he got his license more recently.
If you own a store after January 1st of 2017, I am just stuck at one for like forever.
And he says if other stores can have multiple locations, that's unfair. So for him, it's about leveling the playing field.
I like to tell people every day, it's like playing a game of baseball. They currently have a wooden bat. I have a wiffle ball bat.
This is basically a 3-generation business now.
Other small business owners like Carolyn Joy are not nearly as excited about Proposition 124's prospects.
This is really frustrating for me, especially because as a child, I remember my father having this same battle. This has been going on for years.
Like David, she only owns one store and says the competition would come down to who has enough money to buy the most locations.
What that means for a small business like mine, it really is devastating because I don't have the means to invest in additional businesses. This is my business.
And Chris Fine from the Colorado Licensed Beverage Association says this threatens the livelihoods of hundreds of mom and pop liquor shops.
What it's about is getting as many licenses as possible.
It's definitely not fair that you're giving one category the ability to grow and not the other.
This ballot measure might seem small, but it's attracting big bucks. The group behind it has raised $7 million and counting. All of that money coming from 3 sources, and all of it coming from outside the state. Colorado Fine Wines and Spirits, a Maryland-based company that shares an address with Total Wine, has contributed $5,323,000 to the effort. And Maryland Congressman David Trone and his brother Robert have each contributed another $900,000. The brothers are the founders of Total Wine.
It's really about greed. It's about these huge billion-dollar companies that are coming in and saying, we don't care about the small mom and pop. What we care about is simply profits.
So opponents are asking voters to think about the impacts this will have on Colorado businesses. Of the 3 alcohol-related ballot questions, Proposition 124 is probably the easiest to overlook, but it's complicated and it could be one of the biggest changes in Colorado's liquor laws since Prohibition ended.
Still ahead, margaritas on the move. We'll look at the debate over third-party delivery services bringing drinks to your doorstep and bringing wine to the grocery aisle. Why some say a one-stop shop is a blow to small businesses. During the pandemic, a lot of us got used to being able to have just about anything delivered. Groceries, takeout, even alcohol. Well, now a ballot question wants to make some of those changes permanent. Once again, Denver 7 political reporter Megan Lopez, who takes a closer look at a proposal to allow third-party services like DoorDash to deliver alcohol.
For a moment during the COVID pandemic, everything stopped. Businesses closed, families stayed home, and even the most bustling streets looked like ghost towns. But then we adapted. For restaurants, that meant a lot of takeout.
Hopefully we don't go through something like this again.
That year, the legislature did what it could to help.
Throw it in there.
Passing a temporary law to allow restaurants to sell alcohol to go. The next year, in 2021, lawmakers extended that window, allowing restaurants to sell to-go alcohol for another 4 years. Now, a question on the November ballot wants to make that change permanent, but it also does a little more. In this Denver 7 Election 360, you'll hear from restaurants and business groups who support the idea, liquor stores who say this will hurt their bottom line, and the Colorado Licensed Beverage Association who's worried about the safety aspects of this proposal. First, a look at what your vote on Proposition 126 does. A yes vote would allow third-party companies like Instacart or DoorDash to deliver alcohol that you buy from restaurants, grocery stores, and more. It would also allow alcohol takeout from restaurants permanently. A no vote would keep things the way they are. Only liquor stores would be allowed to deliver alcohol using their employees, and restaurant takeout options would expire in 2025. Small restaurants like Las Hijas de Achilanga are still recovering from the pandemic.
We had just started to own the business when COVID started, and we lost employees.
Owner Yvonne Bringas says this will make a big difference for her restaurant as they look toward their long-term future.
I'm a proponent because it's going to help me to have more sales, to attract more clients, which is what I need to better my business.
They can just focus on making the drink and the food.
So doing what they do best.
Exactly.
And because people are now used to having everything they want delivered to their door with the push of a button.
With technology, with new ordering, with the dynamic of how people order and changing of the times from how restaurants operate. Let's adapt to that.
Supporters say it's time for the change.
These are very minute changes in the law, but it opens up a whole new world for delivery.
Another benefit for small restaurants, more competitiveness.
Restaurants are experiencing an incredible labor shortage, and many simply don't have another staff member to go and deliver alcohol.
Michelle Ling, a spokesperson for groups supporting the ballot initiative, says allowing third parties to help takes a lot of the headaches away from small businesses with limited resources.
DoorDash or Instacart, they can deliver, and it's their liquor license, and so there's less risk for restaurants and a safer process as well.
Because once the alcohol leaves the store, it's up to the delivery service to make sure it gets to the right person, or they, not the restaurant, would be liable.
We're in Fort Collins, Colorado, on the corner of College and Mulberry.
Liquor stores, meanwhile,
This is our store, Mulberry Max.
worry about what this is going to mean for their bottom line.
We have a delivery service. There's not an unmet need of delivery in our community.
Mulberry Max co-owner Josh Beard says his staff is specially trained to deliver alcohol.
We're legally obligated not to sell to anyone who is visibly intoxicated or can't produce a valid ID. It's on us to log every transaction, log every driver's license number.
He's concerned the ballot proposal doesn't have enough safeguards in place to make sure the alcohol stays out of the wrong hands.
The most concerning for me is the safety aspect of it, and also the accountability.
That's a concern Chris Fine from the Colorado Licensed Beverage Association also shares.
When it comes to these third-party delivery folks, and when it comes to accountability, it's one big pointing the other way. When a retail liquor store, if that gets in the wrong hands, they're either going to lose their liquor license or get a gargantuan fine.
The ballot measure does have language requiring the delivery companies to get a permit and liability insurance. It also requires drivers to be 21, complete a certification program, and verify IDs before delivering. But Chris worries drivers trying to make money with lots of quick deliveries could get lax.
They have a schedule. Amazon has a schedule. They don't have time to sit there and wait like the retail liquor store delivery person person does.
So they want people to vote no. All it takes is the push of a button to get just about anything delivered these days. In November, voters will decide whether that change should be permanent for alcohol and whether companies like DoorDash should be able to do it.
It was only a few years ago that grocery stores won the right to carry full-strength beer. And now voters will decide whether they want wine to be allowed at grocery stores as well. Now, Megan continues our coverage with a closer look at Proposition 125.
Proposition 125 asks voters whether they want to allow grocery stores and convenience stores to sell wine starting next March. It means that along with picking up lunch meats and toilet paper, you can also snag a bottle of wine without having to make another stop. A limited number of stores already allow this. This measure would expand it, automatically converting beer retail licenses to also include wine. In this Denver 7 Election 360, you'll hear from a group that supports the measure, another that opposes it, and a small business that says this could force them to close. First, let's look back for some context. For years, grocery stores were only allowed to sell liquor in one location in the state. Everything else could only sell low-strength or 3.2 beer. In 2016, however, that changed with a Colorado Senate bill dubbed the Great Compromise.
Part of that compromise was that the grocers got a limited amount of licenses, full-strength licenses, beer, wine, and spirits, over a certain amount of time.
First, grocery stores could have 5 liquor licenses statewide, then 8, then 13 and 20, and finally unlimited licenses by 2037. Now with the latest proposition, another potentially big change.
Full-strength beer has been a wild success in grocery stores. Consumers love it. Grocery stores love it.
And supporters of Proposition 125 want to replicate that success with wine too.
125 will allow consumers a great deal of convenience. They'll allow consumers to pick up a bottle of wine when they go to the grocery store to pick up dinner.
Michelle Ling represents groups behind the ballot measure. She says 37 states are already doing this, and wine was always supposed to be part of that great compromise.
At the 11th hour, it was taken out. And so this has always been the intent.
She also doesn't buy the concerns that this will hurt liquor store business. It was the same argument made in 2016 over selling beer.
And that has just not been the case. So in fact, we have 10 more liquor stores today.
In the end, she says this measure is about one thing: convenience.
We're standing in Joy Wine and Spirits on 6th and Marion in Denver, Colorado. My dad owned this store since 1963.
At small liquor stores across the state,
we're gonna maybe show you something that you might not know about.
Buying a bottle of wine is as much about the experience as the taste.
What we're gonna offer you is a very personal experience. You're gonna come out feeling confident in your purchase.
Owner Carolyn Joy worries that offering wine in grocery stores will result in less variety.
And there's one buyer. So that one buyer is going to be buying for multiple stores, and you're going to see the same things.
When beer was allowed in grocery stores, Joy says sales dropped dramatically, but they were able to adapt by selling more craft options. For wine, though, it's a different story, so she's worried.
For my business, this would be very devastating.
There's about 1,600 independent mom and pop liquor stores throughout the state, and about half are owned by women, and about 2/3 are owned by folks who have English as a second language.
Chris Fine from the Colorado Licensed Beverage Association worries as many as 800 of those small liquor stores could go out of business if this becomes law. He says the Great Compromise was just that, a compromise meant to last 20 years. So if grocery stores are willing to go back on that deal and try to work wine in now,
it's just a matter of time before they're going to want spirits. This is, again, just about greed. It's not really about consumer convenience.
Big money is being spent on this ballot measure. Instacart, Whole Foods, Target, Safeway, and Kroger have all kicked in millions on this campaign. For retailers, it comes down to convenience, but liquor stores say that comes with a cost. In November, it will be up to voters to decide which of those principles matters more.
You get what you pay for, whether you know it or not. The push for more transparency around Colorado's tax policies is next. There's a growing push for more transparency on tax laws, and one question on the statewide ballot aims to help you better understand the impact on your wallet. Megan Lopez gives us a closer look at Prop GG.
Every year or every election, voters are asked a question, yes or no. Some ask about schools or housing or taxes. All of them impact our lives. In November, voters will be asked 11 more, including one that could change the information that appears on our ballots. Proposition GG asks voters if they want a tax information table to be included on their ballot. Anytime a proposed income tax change comes up, that table would show the measure's effects on different wage brackets. It would break down into 8 categories, ranging from those who make less than $25,000 to those who make over $5 million. This question made it on the November ballot this year after state lawmakers passed a bill to add the language.
In Colorado, voters have more responsibility than they have in any other state in the country because they make direct choices about tax policy.
Democratic State Representative Chris Kennedy says because of Colorado laws, ballot language is confusing.
All the ballot questions are just kind of a long paragraph that's in legalese.
So it can be hard for voters to understand an income tax measure's direct impact on them. Kennedy believes if people see this information on their ballot, they might think twice on how they vote.
Some voters might say, oh gosh, this is only going to save my family $20 a year, but these millionaires over here, they're going to get a $500 tax break.
So for him, this is about transparency.
At the end of the day, all this is giving more information to voters. What they do with that information is up to them.
Opponents, on the other hand,
I just don't think it's a good idea to make the ballot language more complex and longer.
Say this would only add to the confusion. Michael Fields from Advanced Colorado Action says this information is already available to voters.
That's what the Blue Book is for. They send out the Blue Book to put in information about how it impacts people.
Case in point, this year's Proposition 121 to lower the income tax. On page 24 of the Blue Book is a similar chart voters would see on their ballots if GG were to pass, so Fields says this is unnecessary. He also thinks it could add bias to the ballots to try to influence votes.
Does the next legislator come in and say, well, this information is really important about our argument, and so we want to put that in the ballot language too?
At the Denver election headquarters,
things are getting busy around here.
Officials are bracing for November's big ballot return. Between all the candidate races, the statewide questions, and some local issues, this year's ballot is long.
It's 3 cards. Each card is double-sided.
That's more than 1 million pieces of paper to process for the election.
It's a lot of paper, and paper, as you know, has gotten much more expensive.
Denver also had a 3-page ballot in 2020, and because both lawmakers and average citizens can petition to add a question, voters could continue to face a lot of measures in the future. Adding a chart would mean an even longer ballot, which will have a paper cost associated with it. For some, Proposition GG is about transparency. For others, it's a move to manipulate votes. Supported or not, this measure has the potential to change the look of our ballots for years to come.
It could be the biggest change to Colorado's drug laws since legalizing marijuana. We explain Prop 122, aiming to decriminalize magic mushrooms. Stay with us. Denver 7 is committed to in-depth coverage of this critical midterm election, and that's why we sat down for one-on-one conversations with the U.S. Senate and Colorado governor candidates. No debating, no mudslinging, just a chance for the candidates to speak to you, the voters. First, Senator Michael Bennet and challenger Joe O'Dea. What are 3 things you would change in or about the federal government, either policies, size, laws to enact or get rid of, that you could just go, yeah, I'm here, these are the 3 things that I want changed?
Well, first off, we've got to cut back on the bureaucracies. They've been growing at an exponential rate for years. Second thing we've got to end is this war on American energy. We've got to get our energy policy back in line if we want to get ahead of inflation. And the third thing we need to do is we need to start working together on good policies that are good for Colorado. I'm going to reach across the aisle. Partisanship has got to stop. We need to start focusing on what's good for Colorado, and that's what I'll do as your next U.S. Senator.
We've had an economy for 50 years that's worked really well for the top 10% of Americans, but hasn't worked really well for 9 out of 10, including people in Colorado who can't afford housing or health care or higher education or early childhood education. And when that happens in a society, sometimes someone shows up and says, I alone can fix it. You don't need a democracy. You don't need the rule of law. You should expect your public sector and your private sector to be hopelessly corrupt. And that's the dark vision Donald Trump won on, and I don't agree with that.
We covered a lot of ground, and I pressed them both on the partisanship that has divided this country. And one of the key issues in this election, the economy. And that's how my colleague Nicole Brady started her one-on-one interviews with Governor Jared Polis and challenger Heidi Ganahl.
To a certain degree, the challenges that everyday Coloradans face are really come out of our economic success, meaning costs have gone up, like housing, and people are frustrated with the traffic. You know, those are signs the economy is strong, but we need to do something about the costs that have gone up. So if I have the opportunity to serve for a second term, you're going to see us lean into more housing close to where jobs are, reducing costs so families can get into home ownership and also have affordable rental opportunities for workforce.
We're going to reduce the size of government a little bit back to where it was before the current governor took place. We're also going to do a hiring freeze. He's added 4,000 new full-time employees, so we need to slow that down. And then we'd also like to take to the voters of Colorado a proposal to change the way we get Tabor refunds, so they're permanent income tax reductions, and we change fees back to taxes so they're in the general fund.
You can watch our conversations streaming anytime on Denver 7 Plus and on Denver7.com. It was just a decade ago that Colorado voters decided to legalize marijuana, and now there could be another major change to the state's drug laws, this time to legalize some psychedelic substances. Denver 7's Megan Lopez once again.
It's hard to believe that it's been a decade since Colorado voters passed a ballot measure to legalize marijuana, the first major change to the state's drug law in years. In the blink of an eye, dispensaries bloomed all over the state. And something people spent years behind bars for before became big business. In November, voters will be asked whether it's time for another major update to Colorado drug laws, this time with psychedelics. Proposition 122 asks voters if they want to allow licensed healing centers to administer psychedelic mushrooms to people 21 and older. Cities and counties would not be allowed to ban them. It would also decriminalize the personal possession and cultivation of 5 substances: psilocybin, psilocin, ibogaine, mescaline, and DMT. However, the measure doesn't allow for retail sales. Oregon passed a similar measure in 2020, and in 2019, voters in Denver decided to decriminalize psychedelics with Ordinance 301. In this Denver 7 Election 360, you'll hear from the group behind the ballot measure, an opponent, a patient, a professor who studied these drugs, and someone who helped push for the decriminalization effort in Denver. For supporters of Proposition 122,
the Natural Medicine Health Act creates a tremendous opportunity for new modalities and healings.
They say these natural medicines have been around for thousands of years and they're safer than opioids. They point to Denver's decriminalization as a success story, and they want to be clear.
We don't want to see a commercialized model. We don't want to see recreational dispensaries for these natural medicines.
That's why the measure calls for licensed healing centers with an intake and a screening process, and for Colorado's Department of Regulatory Agencies to be involved.
We need to be really careful with this. We want to have access programs. We want to make sure that these prices aren't getting so out of hand that it isn't equitable.
They're asking people to vote yes for the sake of healing.
It has done great good for many different people to be able to expand themselves, to learn, to grow, to self-heal, and that's a powerful thing.
For years, Alan Floyd has lived with an unbearable truth.
I have a terminal illness.
Something most of us can't even begin to fathom.
And I was told I had 2 years to live.
Since his diagnosis, he's dealt with severe depression and a lot of pain. He's tried everything.
Opioids, fentanyl, oxycodone, Dilaudid were the primary ones I was taking.
When none of that worked, he turned to psychedelics, and he says it's been life-changing.
The depression has lifted to the point where my psychiatrist says I no longer have treatment-resistant depression. My attitude is a lot better. I understand that I'm dying, and I'm okay with that now.
The clinical trials completed on psilocybin mushrooms have mostly focused on the benefits for depression and end-of-life distress.
Alan's experience is not a one-off. Studies by Johns Hopkins, UC San Francisco, and even the FDA have found benefits in psychedelics.
They're finding that 60 to 80% of participants are reporting an immediate and substantial decrease in depression. For end-of-life distress.
Shannon Hughes from CSU says it's safer than cannabis, you can't overdose on it, and you won't get addicted to it.
Psilocybin is actually one of the safest psychoactive substances.
It's a con. The idea that this is really about health is not true at all.
Jeff Hunt from the Centennial Institute doesn't believe the proponents. He says this measure is about one thing: money.
This is about commercialization. This is eventually about making sure that these companies can get these drugs out there, make as much money as they can.
While supporters see Denver as an example, Hunt has a very different take.
No one would be saying that we're doing very well in the city of Denver with our drug issues.
He worries this is going the same way as marijuana and will eventually face the same problems.
We still have a really big black market problem in the state. We need to be looking at ways to get people off drugs, not finding ways for people to take further drugs.
So if there really are medical benefits, he wants the FDA to review the substances, test them, and then come up with rules.
We're not at all opposed to utilizing that pathway.
But he says this ballot measure is not the way. Of all the voices you'd expect to support Proposition 122, community activist Melanie Rose Rogers is probably one of them.
In 2019, it was a grassroots movement. We were all volunteers.
She was one of the organizers behind Denver's decriminalization effort.
We just believe in the overall benefits of psilocybin mushrooms.
And yet, she's one of the loudest critics of this measure.
It's important that we do this, in a right way, and we don't rush to do it.
She wants decriminalization, not legalization, to be the first step, and she doesn't like that an out-of-state group is spearheading the effort, pouring $2.8 million into this campaign.
It is not Colorado community-led.
She also has concerns about DORA regulating psychedelics, the fact that cities can't reject these centers, and social equity, worrying that not enough minority voices were included in this discussion. And
I actually think that the cost of sitting in these licensed healing centers are not going to be able to be affordable for everybody.
So she wants people to think twice before saying yes. This year marks a decade since Colorado voters became the first state to legalize marijuana. This year, they'll be asked whether it's time to do the same for psychedelics and significantly rewrite the state's drug policies once again.
We've made it easy to keep track of the 2022 midterm elections. You can read up on all the ballot measures and all the candidates in our voters guide on Denver7.com. Now, a special thank you to Megan Lopez for all her hard work during this election season. And you can get election updates on November 8th right here on Denver 7. We will have live coverage throughout the night, tracking results as they come in. Thank you very much for watching.